to our next panel discussion where we're going to be talking about the link between mental distress and financial distress and how the two are related. As I mentioned earlier, we know that there's a clear link between our mental health and our financial health. That people who are in debt are 3 times more likely to experience depression or anxiety. And it seems to be a two-way street, that when your mental health suffers, your financial health can suffer. But we also know on the flip side of the coin, when our financial health is struggling, our mental health tends to decline. So we have an amazing panel of experts to talk to you today and answer all of our questions about how do you manage your mental health and your financial health. I'll introduce you to each of our panelists. Caleb Silver's joining us again to help ask some more of our questions. And we also have Mike Baer. Mike is a New York Times bestselling author. He is a personal development coach, and he's the owner of CAST Centers, a mental health and addiction treatment center network. And you may have seen him on Dr. Phil, where he appears quite often. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks for having me.
We're excited to talk to you. We have George Blount. George is a financial therapist, which I have to say, I've never heard of a financial therapist before. So I'm super excited to talk to him. He's the founder of Get in Balance, which is a financial therapy and consultant firm where he helps address all things psychological, economic issues, and mental health and well-being. So welcome, George.
Thank you so much for having me.
And finally, we have Carolyn McClanahan, who is a physician turned financial planner. So I'm sure she's going to have some interesting perspectives for us about the link between our well-being and our financial health. She's also the director of financial planning for Life Planning Partners. Welcome, Carolyn.
Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to this session.
So do I. I think having this session is so important because so often we tend to either think when I get my mental health in order, my finances will get in order, or I'll feel better once my financial health is taken care of. But it's really hard to address one without the other. So I'm looking forward to diving in and figuring out just how do we do this. My first question is for Mike. As a life coach, how much of what you deal with has to do with money somewhere along the lines, either that people are struggling emotionally and perhaps it's because of money, or they're overspending because they're trying to make themselves happy? And what steps do you take to address financial issues with your clients?
Oh, money. You know, there's no aspect of mental health that money does not touch. Whether you're looking at relationships, getting into treatment, length of stay with getting help, entrepreneurship, business loans, mortgages, financial stress really dictates so much around how we live our lives. And for whatever reason, and I'm so glad we're having this conversation, it's really separated. Typically, people just talk about finances or they just talk about mental health, but there's such a bridge between the two. And I would say everyone I work with, there's a conversation at some point that has to do with what they want to do with their life or what they want to get out of based upon money. And we've had a lot of people come to our treatment facility a little too late because they just didn't want to spend the money on getting help, or they just couldn't figure out how to get their insurance to spend the money on getting help. So it's prevalent in every aspect of what I do.
Mike, I got to follow there. Sorry. I'm sorry about that.
That's a good point about paying for treatment. A lot of people say, well, if my financial health is struggling, how do I pay for treatment? Go ahead, Caleb.
My question is, in the past year and a half, as people have maybe had that chance to reset, if they've had that chance to reset, have they reconsidered the importance of career, the importance of making a few $1 million so they can kick it? Have you seen that transition in folks, or has it been mostly folks stressed out one way or the other in that inability to make a move?
Well, I think what I've seen is the people who struggled with coping have struggled a lot more. So the consequences around the stress of money has become, really exacerbated. I mean, it's been a real big challenge. And the market is shaky. I mean, we all know the stock market right now. Like 1 minute, everyone's making a lot of money. This past week, the stock market was taking more of a dive. So, it's I find that certain people through COVID really spent the time on working through their business and next steps and utilize that as an opportunity. And the people that I've worked with that didn't have created quite a bit of debt and stress in their lives. And we all know when someone has debt, their mental health suffers tremendously.
And I'm curious from your perspective, George, we know that when people are emotional, it's tough to make a financial decision. Our anxiety spills over. So maybe we're worried about COVID and then we think, I can't invest money right now. Or if we're battling depression, it's hard to make a decision anyway. How do you help people make emotional financial decisions when they're struggling emotionally?
Yeah, good question. I think the first recommendation when struggling with your financial decisions is to be aware of the pace. We are likely to make irrational or inappropriate decisions when we make decisions under duress, when we make decisions without the proper context, when we're making that decision without sufficient knowledge or relatedness, if we don't understand how it actually applies to me. So it's important to slow down enough to process those feelings and understand the significance of it. When you are processing, start to fill in some of those blanks. How will this impact me? Do I have all the relevant information? Should I engage an expert or not? Do I have sufficient time to answer these questions? And if you can really go through that process, then you can make a more appropriate and prudent decision. The struggle may arise simply from the fact that you're making decisions faster than needed, and you're doing that without any of the key information that you need personally, so that way you don't have regret or anxiety at the end of that decision-making process.
I see that a lot, that people are scared of making a decision. And so some people overthink. They just keep thinking and thinking and they can't move. But then I see other people that just get impulsive. It's so stressful to think about it. And the thought of researching something seems really daunting. So they just jump in and fill out the paperwork really quickly and say, I can't think about this anymore. Where do you recommend people go to get help, or how do they educate themselves when they need to learn more about something before making a decision?
Yeah, two parts of that question. I think I'll answer the first one. If you are presenting people with information, be aware of what happens to human behavior when you don't provide context, when you're not giving people ample information, when you're making people make decisions faster than they are capable of making it. That is going to increase the likelihood that the response is not in their best interest. And that's going to be a problem, not in the present day, but maybe in the future. And so you have to be aware of that. So from the perspective of the people giving advice or making recommendations, that's something that you would consider. For the people that's taken this advice and you actually have to make these decisions, it's always important that you have some type of policies in place. It's relevant at this time in our lives to say, okay, in the case of an emergency, this is what I'm going to do, right? Or in the case of kind of losing a job, this is what I'm going to do. Don't wait for it to happen and then try to respond as quickly as you can at the event. If you have time and if you just are easier writing this stuff down, come up with certain policies for how you treat life events, so that way when it happens, it's not a shock to you. And so if I have my lost a job policy, when that happens, I'm going to have an immediate way to trigger some course of action that prevents me from moving too fast. If I have the stock market went down too much type of policy, I need to have some type of response that allows me to slow down, understand what's happening, seek out the resources that I need to feel better about what's happening, and then I move forward. But if we are simply just relying on life to happen and then responding in the moment, we increase the likelihood of bad outcomes or more stress in the future because we didn't take the time at that moment to think it all the way through.
That makes sense. Our anxiety goes down when we have a plan, when we know, rather than worrying about what if something bad happens, when we know if it does, here's what I'm going to do. It just makes us feel a lot better. Carolyn, as a physician turned financial planner, I imagine there probably aren't many people who have ever had both careers. So because of that, I guarantee you have some unique perspective. What can you tell us about the link between financial health and what you're seeing in terms of people's well-being?
It's understated to say that financial health affects mental and physical health and vice versa. It's just a circular thing that happens. And so when people are under stress because of finances, they release chemicals called catecholamines. I think people have heard of things like epinephrine and stuff like that kind of put your whole body on fire. And so that affects your mental health, affects your ability to think. It affects your physical health, wears you out, makes you tired. You can't sleep. And then once you can't sleep, you start to have bad behaviors to deal with that. If you're feeling stressed all the time, some people may not exercise, eat unhealthy diets, then they may turn to drugs or alcohol. And so then that just causes more problems. And likewise, if you have financial stress in your life and you need help for this, like you guys talked about earlier, accessing therapy, or even if you have chronic disease like going to the doctor, or if you have diabetes, hypertension, you may try to cut short on doctor visits because you don't have money, or cut down on your medicines. And so that makes you even unhealthier. And we'll talk a little bit, I'm sure, about what people can do when they face those situations, especially things like control what you can control and try not to use worry minutes about things you can't control. And I tell people you only get so many worry minutes in your life, so use them on what you can actually do something about.
Oh, I like that, because it's very true that we tend to spend so much time thinking, what if, and then we don't really invest our time and energy into the things that we can control.
Carolyn, if I may, I want to go back to something that George said, which is having that plan and that conversation, which is kind of what you do, right? You help families and individuals set up plans. And a lot of that is for, in some cases, end of life, or those final 10, 20 years, where you want to make sure that you've had those conversations with your children, with members of your family, so they know what you want. Or if you're a person that's going to be taking care of somebody, you know what they're going to want. The first time I met you, we were in a panel talking about the importance of having that conversation before it's too late. How critical is that? And how much of that were you doing in the past year and a half as a financial planner with the background that you have?
Yeah, George was spot on. It's like when you've thought through a situation, it already creates that muscle memory of how you're going to respond when that situation arises. And I recognize this a long time ago. I was an emergency room physician, and we used to do triage emergency practice sessions. So codes and what happens if we have a biochemical attack. That was our playtime in the emergency room. And that taught me well about when you think through things like loss of a job, or if you get diagnosed with a serious illness, if you get dementia, what are you going to do? And to have plans in advance that you've discussed with your family, and that when the bad thing happens, you're prepared. It just brings down the anxiety level so much. And I think it's really important that, especially in the age of COVID, I wrote an article last year, as soon as all this started happening, how to prepare for a prolonged hospital stay. And that helped a lot of people. So thinking through in the current situation, what are the bad things that can happen? It doesn't take a lot of time, but just kind of sketch out. Do I have an emergency fund? Have I let everybody know where all my passwords are? So just doing as much as possible and not dwelling on it, putting it away and making certain everybody knows how to access that information when something happens.
I can speak to the importance of that personally. I was widowed at age 26. When you're 26, life insurance is nothing that you're really thinking about. And knowing that I had something like 30 days to decide what to do with my late husband's retirement fund, I had no idea how much money I needed to keep, how much I should reinvest. And having a plan in place on paper would have made that so much easier, because the last time you want to make a really important financial decision is when your emotions are super high. As a therapist, I know this. However, at the time, it wasn't a choice I had. I had to sit through and figure out how to make it. So I'm glad that everybody here is talking about this and encouraging other people, because it is so important to do. Before we start asking some more questions, I want to remind everybody in the audience, if you have questions, go ahead and ask them. We're going to save time at the end. There's a question mark on the side of your screen. Go ahead and let us know, what questions do you have about mental health and financial health. and we'll save time to get to as many as those as we can. And I want to ask you, Mike, you're in LA where some of your clients, the people you work with, might not necessarily be struggling in terms of day-to-day bills. They may have a lot more money than other people. However, that doesn't mean that they aren't financially distressed. We know that there's some research, and our research over at Verywell has discovered this too. Sometimes the more you have, the more you have to worry about losing. And so anxiety can still be sky high for high income earners. Is that something that you're finding? Even people who are doing okay financially are still really worried about losing their money?
Oh, yeah. I mean, more money, more problems, they say. I mean, more real estate, more bills. California is an extremely high tax rate. A lot of people are trying to figure out how to live between California and other states for tax benefits. A lot have moved out. But, struggle is struggle. And it doesn't make a difference if somebody has a lot of money or a little bit of money. Some people with a lot of money, their issues stem out of feeling like people are taking advantage of them. And they have low self-esteem, and they dedicate themselves purely to work, and that's how they find their self-worth. And when there's not as big a business deals, they're not as happy. So, I mean, there's the whole range, and we all know that money buys more opportunity, but it doesn't buy more happiness. I go to Kurdistan, Iraq, and favelas in Brazil, and I can tell you that if I go to a party in Bel Air or I go to a party in a favela in Brazil, people are having a lot more fun at that party in Brazil, to be honest. Like, it's more happening. And so I know it may be different, and I know Dr. Carolyn or George may know in the United States of America, how is overall happiness measured with, how much money you have. But I can tell you that there's a lot of stress here. But, the other thing too is, when I work with people, I call it champagne problems. You want to complain about your financial stress when you own a place or you own two places. Everything's about putting things into perspective. We have so much to be grateful for, especially living in this country. We have so many opportunities. We have so many resources that exist when we want help, when we want to get better. And it's really about flipping the script. So I've worked with plenty of people with a lot of money. And I just say, poor me. I'm a little sarcastic with them, to be honest, because I just don't. It doesn't help to nurture their feelings around their third home. It drives me crazy, actually.
I think sometimes it's just never enough. It's hard to know. When do you say, okay, enough's enough, right? So many people who are anxious think, well, when I hit this next financial milestone, I'll feel better. They hit it and they don't feel better. They feel like they need to keep saving and collecting and earning, and then they're just always worried about losing it. George, I wonder from your standpoint, one of the things I see often in my therapy office is people will say, I don't even know how to get organized. I don't know how much money I make. I don't know how much money I spend. If I have policies, insurance policies and retirement things, they just kind of collect. They come in the mail, but I throw them in the corner. It's overwhelming to think, how do I start figuring this out? What advice do you give to people who are just struggling with knowing where to start and how to take a look at the reality of their financial situation?
Yeah, if you're getting started, I think it's very difficult to start that conversation with a product or service. And so if you're trying to understand your finances based on understanding the various products and the various services that you have access to and what they're doing for you, that's going to not allow people to get to the right outcome that they're hoping for. My approach is to use a hierarchy of needs to really figure out what is your ideal goal financially. And so when we start at that base level and we're talking about physiological needs, how's your employment? How's your job? Are you able to sleep okay? Are you working 90 hours or 60 hours? Like, do you have the ability to save or not? Like, let's look at your job and let's start to decide whether or not you're in the right place to become an investor. Are you in the right place to become a saver just because of your job? And that's easy to change if you have resources and help in actually changing it. How about your housing situation? That is where people may feel safe. And so if we can arrange for people to have better housing, better transportation, that means that their safety is not an issue. They can actually make better financial decisions that way. And then that actually allows us to talk about different financial decisions that lead to equity versus those decisions that lead to debt. Same thing as love and belonging, which is the next most difficult part. How many people can really talk about their finances? Like the love killers are how much do you make and what's your credit score, right? And so if we look at life in that reality, we can move very far ahead in any relationship, but it is stymied when it comes to finances. So at a bare minimum, when it comes to how we treat ourselves financially, we should feel comfortable explaining that to other people and communicating our financial well-being. Otherwise, no one's going to be able to help you, and you're not going to find that compatibility because problems will arise. Once you get past all of those parts, it's really easy to then say, okay, if we're talking about recognition, reward, or self-actualization, seek out equity in others or seek out equity in yourself. But as long as we've built this pyramid, that's something that means that we are sustaining our ability to have a appropriate lifestyle, that we can see the future of our sustainability and it's not going to change. And then if we are moving further up, it is seeking equity in others, and that can be your investments into stocks or mutual funds. But then the top of it, that self-actualization, to Mike and Carlin's point, that's entrepreneurship. So if you feel like you're the change agent and you are not comfortable seeking equity in others and you rather amplify equity in yourself, then that allows you to go down the entrepreneurship route. So I would say it always helps to stop looking at your financial problems through the viewpoint of products and services. Look through your financial problems through a hierarchy of needs, because it is a visceral feeling. You are looking to survive. Your earnings and taking care of your family are what are the elements that are motivating your decisions. And so if we don't align to those hierarchy of needs, we're missing some of the important questions and we're missing some of the important solutions.
Those are all really good points, because I think a lot of people tend to equate their self-worth with their income, or they think that social media these days puts pressure on people to make it look like they're doing better than they are. And because of that, people feel bad. We look at somebody else who has a new car or somebody else whose house looks beautiful and think, oh, why don't I have that? And that those emotions that get stirred up, I think for a lot of people are really difficult. Then how do you decide what you really value in life and what's most important? How do you help people uncover some of those things, George? How do you help them figure out how to become more comfortable with where they are without necessarily comparing themselves to other people?
Yeah, I think the part of financial therapy that is helpful, that is very prescriptive given where we're at today, is that we have to look at the origination of these emotions that we're experiencing today. They didn't just come out of nowhere. So if you have a feeling of anger when we talk about money, where did that come from? How did it originate? Do you even know where it came from? And if we can understand where it came from, we can understand how to correct it and we can understand how to change it. So financial therapy has a lot of pathways. And I would say one pathway is let's go back and let's see where we got to this point, right? Let's do our origin story, for lack of a better term. So that way it allows us to understand the emotions that we have, because we do know that financial education is not prevalent. So I know that you didn't learn financial education in school. I also know that you probably didn't learn it in college or university. So where did you learn it? That's different for every single person. So let's try to understand the origin of your financial behavior, and that allows us to have a good idea. Once we do that, that's really where your feet are. So if we've uncovered where these emotions are coming from, I'll give you that example. Happiness, but we normally see it as a pursuit of happiness. You may spend money because you think it will make you happy, and it never makes you happy because you are simply chasing it. So it's a detrimental emotion to spend based on the pursuit of happiness because it's something that you never attain. And so we can simply say, why are you doing that? We can point to things that have happened in your life that have never really manifested into the happiness that you're looking for. So why do you keep doing it? And if we start to uncover that, then it allows us to work on the next part, which is now that we know where our feet are today, do you want to change it or do you want to stay the same? And I think once we get to that place of are you happy where you're at or are you uncomfortable with where you're at, that's when every single resource is at your disposal, right? That's when someone like Carolyn, that's a CFP, can come in and say, all right, here's my plan. This is where I want to go forward. But like other professionals, they can help you where you're going to in the future. But I think to your point, Amy, like as in the therapeutic world, when we understand financial therapy and we understand some of the problems that we see today, you have to go backwards and try to understand them. And I think financial therapy is the one discipline that allows us to understand the origin of some of these financial problems before we start to move forward. Because there's a lot of resources once we move forward, not as much in resources in terms of the origin story. So that's a big gap that we're trying to fill with this discipline.
I love this discipline, and I'm the son of a psychotherapist and an investment banker, so this is perfect for me. But you speak to something really important, George, and I would love Carolyn and Mike's perspective on this. I spoke to a financial advisor recently who said the exercise we need to do is talk about how much it costs to be you, not how much it costs to pay your bills every month, but to be the you that you want to be. So if you want to be this person that has a house upstate and you maybe have a beach house, or you go on vacation twice a year, or you like new clothes every fall for the new season, you really have to get that under control. Carolyn, how important is that when you meet clients for the first time, or even those that you've been working with for years, to have that conversation about, let's really get to the bottom of what it costs to actually be the person you want to be?
Oh gosh, Caleb, that's an understatement. You know, a lot of people think of financial planning as investments, and real financial planning, and thank goodness there are more of us out there actually doing it, is first taking stock of what are a client's goals, and also helping them develop, you know, like George was saying, are you happy now? And if not, why? And then it may involve career planning. It may involve helping them break down their spending into what's really valuable to them, the needs versus the wants, and learning how to thoughtfully spend instead of just spend in search of something. So it all starts with figuring out their goals, and then we actually do look at the cost of their life, and then you look at what they're doing now and how much they're saving, and if they continue those behaviors, what does that potentially look like in the future, and where do they have leeway? I think a big mistake people make with financial planning, they'll do a one-time financial plan, and life is not static. It changes constantly. So for us, instead of focusing so much just on investments, because that's just a tiny part of financial planning, we every year review a person's spending and making certain that what they're doing is congruent with who they really are and what they want to be. And once you get that under control, experience is much less expensive than buying things. And once you get people at peace with where they are financially, a lot of times they quit spending that search for buying those things, and their financial picture becomes a lot more secure. So to me, we just need to make the whole focus of financial planning more on this and talk a lot less about investments in the stock market.
You've been saying that for years, and Mike, you probably come across this as well, because maybe some of your clients may be in a good position financially, as Amy mentioned, but at the same time, that doesn't buy you happiness per se, right?
Well, and I think what's so helpful, and I know Carolyn and George and Amy, and is doing an assessment, taking stock of all areas of one's life and figuring out what's really off balance. Because anytime we address any problem, we have to assess it. If you're a therapist and they have diagnoses, you assess the problem, and then you kind of figure out, okay, what is our roadmap based upon all these different criteria that make up this description, where a lot of research has been done around it to help the person. Same thing with financial planning. I assume with Carolyn, there's an assessment that takes place. Mm-hmm. What are your assets? What is your relationship to money? Do you have any retirement saved up? And so, getting help is the wonderful thing we get to do in this life. Is we have so many options of different human beings that we can ask for help. And now, because of the internet, we all have so many options to ask for help. But help is a transaction, even free help. So even if you want to get advice, I always say there's like the wise counsel in our lives. figure out who is that wise counsel that you look up to, who has a good relationship with money, who has a good foundation. Get coffee with them. People like to be able to help other people. However, be coachable. A lot of people say they want help, or they'll show up with Carolyn or George or Amy. They'll say they want help, but they don't want the help you're suggesting. They want a different type of help. So it's really important to trust the process that when you ask experts for help, you're kind of surrendering. And sure, there are horror stories out there, right? Of course, but if you got a little bit of research and you look people up on the internet, you can shake enough bushes so you can feel safe trusting experts' opinions. So that's a long way of answering your question, but I just think assessments is crucial for getting well.
And you bring up a good point that sometimes when we get help, all of us do this. You ask somebody for their advice, and when it's not what you want to hear, you think, well, I'm not going to do that. Or we nod and smile and then never go back. But really, if you don't change anything, nothing in your life is going to change. So when you get advice, to test it as an experiment, could this actually be helpful to me or not? But you won't know until you try. And I'm interested from you, specifically, Carolyn, about how distressed are people about their financial future right now, and what are some of the steps people can take? I think under normal circumstances, people are asking questions like, how do I know how much to save for retirement? Or how do I know it's okay to take a step back with my income because I don't know what's going to happen next week, next month, next year? How do you help people make those financial decisions, especially right now in this world of uncertainty that we're in?
Right. The first point I want to make is the world is always uncertain. And, it's the complex adaptive system science. It's kind of a big term for we don't know what we don't know. And COVID happened. A lot of people knew that we were going to have a pandemic at some point because we always get pandemics at some point. So the most important part to financial planning is to create your resiliency first. So having that emergency fund, making certain you have your bills under control. And so, the step we go through for people who are facing financial insecurity, and I work with very wealthy people, but I also work with very poor people. So the working uninsured in my clinic that we have for people who don't have health insurance. And so and like Mike was saying earlier, you have very happy rich people and unhappy rich people. You have very happy poor people and unhappy poor people. And so money is a differentiating factor, but it's not huge. And so the first thing you've got to do is what you can control. We already talked about that, and quit trying to worry about the things you can't control. But then go to next, what can you control? Identify what your needs and your wants are, and get rid of those wants if you are truly under financial insecurity at this point. And then if you have the ability, negotiate with the people you owe money to and see if there are any other programs available, like school loans. That's a big issue for a lot of people. There are programs out there to help with school loans, especially for low-income individuals. And then find out what services are available. People hear about all these federal programs that we had for COVID. There were a lot of local and state programs that just people didn't know about. So do your research and see what support's available to you. And then as far as healthcare, I also deal with a lot of people who have chronic illness issues. It's important to let your healthcare providers and your mental health care providers know that you're facing financial stress. Sometimes people are just too proud to admit, I'm having trouble. I can't afford this medication, so I'm not going to take it. They don't tell the doctor that. It's so important because doctors, they don't think so much about money sometimes, and that's an issue that they need to work on. And though they do care, though, and if you tell them, I'm having trouble affording this care, what can we do differently? Oftentimes there are other avenues that can be taken that are less expensive or programs that may be available to help you.
I'm glad that you brought that up because I can't tell you how many people have come into my therapy office after they've said to their psychiatrist or their physician, yes, I will do that. And they run into that problem. They get to the pharmacy and figure out, oh, I can't afford that, or I don't have prescription coverage. But I used to work at a hospital where there were tons of programs. As social workers, we could reach out to the manufacturer and often get people medications free of charge, or we can find a different medication that maybe does the same thing but costs way less money. So there are options. And I guess this question is for all three of you. For somebody who says, I need help either in the mental health space and the financial health space, but I can't afford a professional. Are there any resources, services, places you recommend people look into?
So I'll start with that one. Oh, I'm sorry, George. I'm on a roll in my brain here, so I'll take that one from my perspective. So in our community, many communities have different resources available. And so you can go to your city's website. A lot of times they'll list free services are available. You can actually Google free clinics available in my city. And there are also many help groups, and it's not optimal, but there are Facebook groups where you can join the patients like me if you have certain health issues to discuss things. And it's amazing how resourceful patients are and to be able to learn from each other. So going to sites like that to get information to help control costs, and just reaching out to friends and family and networking to try to find out what resources are available. I'm sure George can add a bunch more to that, but there's so many untapped resources. And I think that's one of the sad things. There's so much information out there that people have no idea how to access it.
Yeah, I would add two things, and thanks for the question because I think it's helpful. I don't think a lot of people know that the United States has a financial literacy strategy called, it's run by a group called FLEC, Financial Literacy Education Commission. It's updated every 2 years, and it's prescriptive in terms of what academics, nonprofits, private organizations should do in terms of providing financial education. And one of their key elements of this strategy is to keep the language simple. The reason why people have so much conflict and so much chaos and can't really find help is because we just name things for products, and so sometimes people just don't know where to go, and it's hard to figure out what resources you need. In the financial therapy discipline, I think I would recommend, and some of my other colleagues just recommend, interviewing. There's not a cost to interviewing, a mental health professional, a financial advisor, a financial therapist, a financial planner, and find the one that's appropriate for you. Find the one that's going to listen to you, and here's what you're doing before you actually spend any money. It doesn't cost you any money to be selective and to do your due diligence. The best resources, think like Carolyn said, know what you want, know what your goals are, be able to articulate it, and then interview people and see if they hear the same thing and can help you achieve your goals. Don't look for cheaper alternatives to problems that aren't yours. And I think that is what I see a lot of resources doing for financial problems. There's a lot of people with problems, and there are resources that are available to take care of them. There are also a lot of resources available that people don't need, that are just being recommended because they're free and because they're financial, and folks are not aware of what they're able to do with them. So context, again, is important. We have a strategy when it comes to fixing financial literacy, or at least being aware of where our gaps are and how to move forward. We need to make sure that we follow those instructions, that we give people the opportunity to understand what their gaps are, and then provide the proper resources for them to simply ask for help without that help coming with an attached cost. Because I have found, and I'll kind of defer to Carolyn and Mike on this as well, but our services are our services. We charge what we charge because it's valuable. That's what people do. And so one of the things that we do is we want to be able to give you the help that you're looking for without creating financial stress on ourselves. And so I think one of the best things that we can do is offer you guidance in how to communicate, guidance in how to actually be the best version of yourself, how to articulate it, where to look to for that guidance, and then go through this process of interviewing before you spend anything to make sure that it's ideal for you.
And I if I could jump on that sled as well. Is, you know, it's like our program takes insurance. So we take like most major PPO insurances. And we also have at Cass Centers, and we have a relationship with the city of West Hollywood where we always give away a scholarship bed, right? And a lot of programs have relationships with the city if people reach out to the city to find out who are the providers in your area that there's funding for, that they offer help to the community. There are so many free resources. I'll get people saying to me like, well, I couldn't get my daughter into there and it's too expensive. And I'm like, and I'm not buying an Hermes bag. But guess what? You deal with what you deal with. That's life. Like, life doesn't, it just because a program's very expensive doesn't mean they should give it away for free. And it doesn't mean it's best for your daughter. Just spending more money on mental health does not mean you're going to get well any sooner. So money may equal luxury in terms of getting well. You may get more massages. You may get more of a view. You may feel like it's more fabulous. But the reality is a lot of people I've helped, even families with a lot of money, I've referred their sons or daughters to programs where half the people are county funded, because I'll tell them, I'll say, your son or daughter can't afford to live on their own. Why are you going to put them up in a place that's not matching their lifestyle? And I just think there's so many, I am shocked. And I every year I get more surprised at how many free, wonderful resources exist when you look for them. I'm talking scholarships. I had 3 jobs when I was becoming an alcohol and drug abuse counselor, Caribou Coffee, YMCA, and then I applied for the LGBT scholarship for men seeking to become counselors. Who the hell thought that was a scholarship? I didn't, but you look, you find it, you figure it out, and you hustle, and you can't take 1 or 2 or 3 closed doors as a sign that, like, you can't do it. It's like that. And you could either go, it's a closed door, or you can look at it and be like, that wasn't the right door for me. And you move on. So I just think there's so many resources available to people today, and every city is offering them.
I
think for people who really don't.
Because you said the city, I'm sorry.
Go ahead,
Because
George.
you said the cities are offering them, the best resource for everybody is your state treasurer, because the treasurers are responsible for financial education and the financial policies in your state. And so the treasurers can be very specific on the financial issues that are happening in your state. And then they can also offer very specific resources based on what's happening in your state. And they are the kind of conduits to make sure that you have all of that access. And so it is not the glamorous approach. You're not going to win beauty pageants. You're not going to compete against TikTok when it comes to finding this financial advice. But doing simple things like going to mymoney.gov, which outlines our financial literacy strategy, going to your state treasurer's website and finding what financial resources they have available or what their strategy is for financial education and consumer protections in your state. That's a good place to start. And the simple fact that we avoid some of these very common, less glamorous, very effective resources in favor of something that's more catchy, that can be problematic. And it really just means that we have to give more air to wanting to help and really listening to people when they say, I want help, and being very clear and articulate in what that help actually means and how we can arrive at a solution.
Those are all great resources. And I think for anybody who's struggling, a great place is to start. Call your local community mental health center and say, I need help. Where do I go? Or call a financial planner and say, I don't have the money to pay you, but do you know of any place I can get help? Or start with your physician as well and say, I'm struggling. And they can often at least point you in the right direction of where to go. Yeah. We have some amazing questions that have rolled in, but before we get to any of those, Caleb, do you have any more burning questions we should ask these folks while we have them?
I'm sure there are no hotter than the ones we're getting from our attendees, because that's a smart bunch that keeps asking questions. I'm seeing them come in the channel, so let's get to those right away because I'm very curious.
So Jonathan asked, what's the main structure of a financial plan and how can a beginner start? This one is open to...
I'll take that one, I guess, as a financial planner. Yeah, so there are different ways to get financial planning. If you're just starting out, you may not need a full financial planner. There are wonderful financial literacy sites. Investopedia is one of them to get started on what you need to do for basic finances. And once you get a little bit more complicated and you have one-off situations, let's say you are changing a job and you don't know what to do about your 401k choices, your health insurance, getting an hourly financial planner and paying them for 1 or 2 hours of advice. There are many more financial advisors now offering hourly financial advice. And then once you get a little bit more complicated and you need help with investments, you still might do well with an hourly person just telling you where to put your money. You don't need to have some person doing fancy things with all your money. And then if you end up having a lot of wealth or you start making a lot of bigger money, you might want to hire a financial planner that is doing more investment management in addition to the financial planning. And make sure, though, that they're doing really good financial planning. And when I say financial planning, it's not just investments. Again, you have to know your cash flow, so budgeting, how you spend money, but also your estate planning, insurance planning, and tax planning is a huge one. A lot of people are very inefficient in taxes, and they think they're going to make a load of money on investments where they actually might make more money just being a little bit more tax efficient. So do your basic education. Make sure you use a fee-only fiduciary. So for real financial planning, because they're not incentivized to just sell products to you. They actually want to do the problem solving as far as giving you a good financial plan.
Great, thank you. A question came in from Sean about emergency funds. He wants to know what steps should you take and what tools should I look for to help establish an emergency fund? So I'm curious, do you guys recommend emergency funds? How do you know how much to put in it? And how do you set one aside?
Yeah, I'll do that one.
Okay.
I think it's more of a conversation that I like to have around saving and investing. And so the emergency fund is really building your savings behavior. Savings is a process of actually putting a little bit away or setting a goal and making sure that you do it habitually over time, so that way it becomes a second part of what you're doing. Investing doesn't have that same endowment feeling. Like if you have a lot of money, you can invest it and lose it and not feel attached to it. But if you're putting a little bit away, you're going to have a closer attachment to that money, and you're going to feel the need to do more specific and strategic things with it. That will end up becoming your emergency fund. Your emergency fund may grow to a point where now you can do some other things with it. But it all starts with an effective saving strategy. And I would say the majority of people do want to be good savers. People want to make returns on investments. But if you were to ask the majority of people, what would you like to achieve? The majority of people, I believe, would say, I want to save. And so that allows this opportunity for us to build the right type of behavior through slow and steady putting money away, or slow and steady habits that allow you to manifest an emergency fund or achieve some other goal. Because once your fund is taken care of and that habit's built, can you just apply that goal to something else?
Yeah, I want to add to that, though, as far as how much you should have. So for people who have really stable jobs, we recommend at least 3 to 6 months, especially if you have a lot of debt, go more towards 6 months. If you have a 2-earning household, it may allow you to go more towards 3 months. But if you have a truly unstable job, and especially if you have a lot of debt, an emergency fund of a year is not unheard of.
Yeah, I was going to ask you the follow-up question, Carolyn, but you jumped right in there. But what about this notion of you have debt at the same time you want to save and invest? Is there a right balance, or is that age dependent, Carolyn? And anybody could really jump on this, but I'll start with you, Carolyn. Is it I should focus on the debt down payments here and then worry about investing, or should you try to do things concurrently and keep both plates spinning?
That's going to be, it depends. Definitely, if somebody has a 401k plan where there's a match for free money, you want to be concurrent and get your match, because that's free money. That's 100% return right there. You don't want to turn that away. And then you have to look at what is the cost of your debt. If you have what I call the painful debt of credit cards, high interest loans, then you'll want to work on paying those more down, but of course making sure you have an emergency fund so you don't end up back in the same boat. And then as you get down to debt that's not as high cost, so let's say you have a 3% mortgage, that's not as worrisome. And then you might want to balance more saving towards your future, but definitely get rid of those, especially 12%, 15%. Credit card debt, that's just crazy. That needs to be get under control before you do anything more than meeting your match or your 401k.
That's really
also at some of its conversations as well, right? To Carolyn's point, you have to be presented with these alternatives, and you have to say, what am I going to do? Pay 10% interest or get a 6% return in the marketplace? Like, these are some of the things that you have to put in front of you and say, okay, these are the options that you have. You can choose option A or option B, right? And really start to guide people into doing something that is more prudent. Otherwise, people will, inadvertently choose what they think is the better option. Oh, I'm going to just do the equity side. We're not really looking at, to Carolyn's point, cost of debt, compared to the cost of your equity or your return. Those are the types of questions and the ways that you have to communicate, so that way we get the most out of these relationships and we don't just arbitrarily, seek to be an investor before we understand kind of what the context of being an investor means.
So we have time for one more question, and this one is probably a good one for you, Mike. How important is meditation, and how long should someone meditate for if they want to use it to manage their stress?
Well, like anything, I mean, meditation's a loose garment, and everyone has to figure out their fit, and everyone's different. Some people need to, light some candles and spin a bowl around, and other people need to just sit still and breathe. But meditation is really about just breathing and getting in the moment and getting centered and just allowing your body to go back to its resting place. Because when we allow ourselves to get to that resting place, we make decisions that are more authentic. They're less out of emotion. They're more balanced. They're more who we are. We have less moments of feeling like, oh gosh, I shouldn't have said that, or acting out of fear. And so meditation is truly authentic, and the strategy is whatever is going to work for that person. For some people, it's being in their garden. For other people, it's going on a walk. And for other people, it's sitting still. So sometimes when I've spoken to people and they say, I can't meditate, I'm like, well, what version of meditation are you trying to do? Because literally, anytime you're bringing your body back and your energy and your spirit into a resting spot, you're doing a form of meditation. And so I think it's absolutely crucial that we are aware and we take time to get back to who we are.
Wise advice. Well, everybody, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. I know I've learned a lot. I hope our audience did as well. Everything from those reminders of a financial plan to how to manage our distress around it. So Mike, George, and Carolyn, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And I hope that everybody in the audience will stick around for the next panel to hear from Dr. Jessica Shepard and her panel, which will be called Paying It Forward, the Future of Care from the Patient Perspective. Thank you, everyone.